I was standing at the head of the banquet table, my hand trembling slightly as I held the vintage champagne glass, ready to give the toast I had spent months perfecting for my only son's wedding day. The room was a sea of white roses, expensive silk, and the heavy, floral scent of a five-figure floral budget that I had personally bankrolled without a single complaint. My son, Leo, stood up next to his beautiful bride, Sophia, and for a moment I felt a swell of pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes, until he leaned into the microphone, looked directly at his new father-in-law, and said with a smirk that felt like a physical blow to my chest, "I'm officially a Montgomery now because I've always hated my father's last name and the last baggage that comes with it." The room went silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears, and as I looked at the smug, mocking faces of Sophia's old money family, I realized that I hadn't just paid for a wedding. I had paid for my own public execution. Within 10 minutes of that confession, I made a decision that would not only halt the celebration, but would effectively dismantle the golden life I had built for him from the ground up. Was I wrong for reacting so harshly to a man who had just insulted everything I worked for on the happiest day of his life? Or would you have stood there and let your own blood spit on your legacy while you held the bill? I need you to hear how this happened because I'm being called a bitter old man, but I believe I simply gave my son exactly what he asked for. A life completely severed from my name and everything it provided. To understand why those words were so poisonous, you have to understand where the name Vance comes from. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. I grew up in a town where the Vance name was synonymous with trash. My father was a man who couldn't keep a job and even struggled to keep his hands to himself, leaving us with a reputation that felt like a permanent stain. When I left home at 18 with $50 in my pocket, I made a vow to myself. I would take that broken, dirty name and I would polish it until it shone like a diamond. I worked 3 jobs, I put myself through night school, and I eventually built Vance Logistics from a single van into a regional powerhouse. Every time I signed a contract or saw my name on the side of a truck, it was a victory over the shadow of my father. I gave my son, Leo, everything I never had. He went to the best private schools, he had a trust fund that most people would kill for, and he never had to wonder where his next meal was coming from. I thought I was raising a man who understood the value of where we came from, but looking back, I realize I was just raising a man who was ashamed of the dirt on my boots, even though that dirt paid for his designer shoes. The trouble really started when he met Sophia. Sophia's family, the Montgomerys, are the kind of people who have portraits of their great-grandfathers in their hallways and speak in hushed, bored tones about their summer estates. From the moment Leo introduced us, I could tell they looked at me like I was a fluke, a new money peasant who just happened to get lucky. Sophia was even worse. She would make these little jokes about how the Vance name sounded like a brand of discount detergent or how it didn't quite have the historical weight of a name like hers. Leo would just laugh along, and it ate at me, but I kept my mouth shut because I wanted him to be happy. When they got engaged, Sophia's father made it very clear that he expected a certain standard for the wedding. I agreed to pay for the whole thing: the venue, the catering, the designer dress, even the honeymoon in the Maldives, because I wanted to show them that a Vance could hold his own against a Montgomery. I thought I was buying respect. I didn't realize I was just funding my own replacement. As the wedding planning progressed, Leo became more distant. He stopped calling me to check in and started acting like my suggestions were embarrassing. He insisted that my side of the family be tucked away in the back of the room so we wouldn't clash with the aesthetic of Sophia's high society friends. He even asked me not to mention the business in my speech because it was too blue collar. I was hurt, deeply hurt, but I convinced myself it was just wedding stress. I told myself that once the ring was on her finger, he'd go back to being my son. But then came the morning of the wedding. I went to Leo's dressing room to give him a gift, a gold watch that had been my first major purchase when the business took off. He barely looked at it. He was busy talking to his best man about how he couldn't wait for the ceremony to be over so he could finally drop the dead weight. I thought he was talking about the stress of the day. I was so wrong. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. But during the reception, when the toast started, the atmosphere shifted. Sophia's father got up and gave a long, winded speech about adding a new branch to the Montgomery tree. I thought he meant Leo was joining the family, which is fine. But then Leo got up. He didn't thank me for the education, the house I had helped him buy, or even the $150,000 party everyone was currently enjoying. Instead, he looked at his father-in-law and made that comment, "I'm officially a Montgomery now." He went on to talk about how the Vance name was a burden he was glad to shed, how it represented a past he wanted to forget, and how he was finally joining a legacy that actually matters. He laughed as he said it, and Sophia's family cheered like they had just won a war. I sat there, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed in a vise. I looked at the trucks, the warehouses, the 30 years of sweat and blood I had put into that name, and I realized my son didn't just want a new name. He wanted to erase me. So that's the situation I was in. I was sitting at a table I had paid for, surrounded by people who looked down on me, listening to my own son announce that he was effectively disowning our family history for the sake of a more prestigious label. He wanted to be a Montgomery, fine, but he seemed to have forgotten that every single luxury he enjoyed was a result of being a Vance. Before I tell you how I responded to that toast and the absolute chaos that followed when the Montgomery lifestyle met the reality of a Vance bank account, I want you to pause and comment below. If your child publicly insulted your life's work and your family name at their wedding, a wedding you paid for, would you have kept your mouth shut to save their big day, or would you have walked out? Am I being too sensitive about a last name, or is this the ultimate betrayal? I'm reading the comments because I need to know if I'm the monster my son's new family says I am. I didn't cause a scene immediately. I'm a businessman. I know how to keep a poker face. I sat through the rest of the toasts. I even clinked my glass, but my mind was working faster than it ever had. I realized that the trust fund I had set up for Leo, the deed to the house he and Sophia were living in, and the position he held at my company were all tied to his legal status as my heir. In my will and in the company bylaws, there were specific clauses about the Vance legacy. If he was no longer a Vance by choice, he was no longer a part of the legacy. As soon as the cake was cut, I quietly excused myself and went to the back of the hall where the wedding coordinator was standing. I asked for the final invoices that were supposed to be charged to my credit card at the end of the night, the remaining balance for the premium open bar, the late night catering, and the luxury transportation. I told her there's been a change of plans. I'm only responsible for the guests who share my last name. For everyone else, including the groom, you'll need to seek payment from the Montgomerys. The coordinator looked at me like I was insane, but I was dead serious. I walked back into the room just as the DJ was starting the first dance. I waited until the music stopped, and then I walked up to the microphone. The room went quiet again, expecting a sentimental father-son moment. I looked at Leo, who was still wearing that smug Montgomery grin. I said, "Leo, I heard your speech. I heard how much you hate the Vance name and how you're glad to be rid of the baggage it carries. I respect your decision to be your own man and join a new legacy, and since you're no longer a Vance, I've decided to respect that transition fully. As of this moment, I am withdrawing all financial support tied to the Vance name. That includes the remainder of tonight's bill, your trust fund, and your position at my company. Since you're a Montgomery now, I'm sure your new family will be more than happy to provide the high-class life you've always wanted. I wish you both a very prestigious life." The silence this time was even heavier. Leo's face went from smug to ghostly white in 3 seconds. Sophia's father stood up, blustering about how uncouth this was, but I just smiled at him. "You wanted a Montgomery, you got one. But you're going to have to pay for him." I turned and walked out of the hall. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone was blowing up. Leo was calling, Sophia was screaming in my voicemail, and even my ex-wife was texting me that I had ruined their lives. But I didn't stop. The next morning, I called my lawyer and my HR department. Since Leo had hated the name, I removed him from the executive board. Since the house was technically owned by a Vance family trust, I sent a formal notice that the Montgomerys had 30 days to vacate or start paying market value rent. The aftermath was a nuclear explosion. Sophia's family, the old money Montgomerys, turned out to be all hat and no cattle. They had the names and the portraits, but they were actually drowning in debt and were counting on Leo's trust fund to keep their estate afloat. When they realized the money was gone, they turned on Leo instantly. They didn't want a Montgomery who was broke. The marriage lasted exactly 4 months. Sophia filed for divorce when she realized they were going to have to live in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a mansion. Leo came crawling back to me, crying about how he was just joking and how he didn't mean it. But I told him the truth. You can't spit on the foundation of your house and then act surprised when the roof falls in. I didn't give him back his job or his trust fund. I told him he could have an entry-level position in the warehouse under a different manager, and he had to work his way up from the bottom just like I did. He's currently working 40 hours a week, sweating in the same warehouses he used to mock. And he's still using the Montgomery name because I told him he isn't allowed to be a Vance again until he earns the right to carry it. My relationship with him is cold, but honest. For the first time in his life, he's actually learning what it means to build something. He hates me right now, and maybe he always will. But I'd rather have a son who hates me while learning the value of $1 than a son who loves me while secretly loathing everything I am. The Montgomerys have disappeared back into their world of crumbling estates and fake prestige, and I'm still here, signing my name Vance on every check that keeps my world turning. The moral of this story is simple. Never bite the hand that feeds you, especially if that hand is the one that built the table you're sitting at. Your heritage isn't something you can just swap out like a designer jacket when it becomes unfashionable. It's the ground you stand on. I don't regret what I did at that wedding for a second. I didn't destroy his life. I just removed the life I'd given him so he could see if his new one was actually worth the paper his new name was written on. Like this video if you think Leo got exactly what he deserved for his ungratefulness. Subscribe for more stories about family drama, hard-earned lessons, and the high price of betrayal. And please, share your final thoughts on this mess in the comments. Was I a hero for standing up for my name, or was I a villain for ruining his wedding? I'll see you all in the next story.